Добро утро, дами и господа. Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Благодаря ви, че сте тук и за втория ден на конференцията Resource Southeast, второто издание на това събитие. Днес ще имаме честта да чуем два много интересни панела. Започваме с панел за финансиране на нови възобновяеми проекти, както и за банкируемост, какво е необходимо, за да бъдат финансирани такива проекти. И бих искал да поканя на сцената Радослав Миков, който е модератор на този панел.
I'd like to invite Radoslav Mikov on stage and he will introduce the guests. Thank you, Nikolai. Good morning. Please take your seats. At today's panel, this is Asen Yagodin, Mr. Kirov, Konstantin Kirov from Procredit Bank, and Mr. Pislenski from the EBRD. Good morning. My thanks to the organizers for yesterday, for this wonderful opportunity, for this hot topic put to discussion. This is great that you sustain this interest. And what we're going to discuss today is the role of banks in renewables, funding renewables projects. These are the leading banks which are represented here, some of the leading banks, and not only on the local markets. And one of the key activities in their portfolio is funding this kind of projects. Mr. Pislenski is Deputy CEO and senior banker in Bulgaria's EBRD. He's got more than 10 years of experience in the bank, and he works for funding power production, natural resources. He's also involved in technical assistance, policy advice in Bulgaria's power production sector. Mr. Pislenski, EBRD has proven that it works towards a sustainable investment climate through a number of initiatives and grant schemes, funding projects, but also by improving regulations. You took part in several bids in Kosovo, Macedonia, Albania. In Albania, it was the gas sector adopting the European norms. How could your bank help improve the overall regulation environment, and what kind of issues do you see in Bulgaria and in the region? Thank you, Mr. Mikov. My thanks to the organizers for inviting me. Yesterday, I attended several panels. They were of outstanding interest to me, and the areas that we're discussing provided different perspectives, and that's a turning point we're going through at the moment for Bulgarian energy production. EBRD, as an international financial institution, we are designed to support energy production, decarbonization, specifically investing in renewables, green energy, and also the providing electrification of industry as a whole. And these objectives are laid down in EBRD's strategies. We have an overall energy strategy, and also we have a Bulgarian strategy. And we're trying to provide support along several channels. One of them is funding projects. In Bulgaria, we have a relatively small team, and we have a limited capacity to look at a high number of projects, and we try to focus on a small number of projects, but having a scale and complexity. And the ways that we can fund are not only limited to lending. You might know that we can also invest in equity, where we have certain restrictions. We have to be a minority shareholder. We have a clear exit strategy, and all the hybrid instruments between debt and equity, depending, we cover the range depending on the needs of specific projects. We're also trying to actively work with the government, with all the public institutions and administration, in order to try and improve the regulation environment, in order to encourage future green energy projects. We've got quite a few examples of projects we have already been executed or are being run at the moment in Bulgaria, in other countries as well. And in many cases, we support the design, the schemes, the gap contracts. We've done it in Poland, in Romania. Also, tender programs for green energy capacity. We've got a host of examples in the Western Balkans, in Poland, in Romania. Another interesting projects we're doing in Greece related to putting together regulations in offshore wind generation. That's a very interesting line of business, and I think it will find an increasing prominence in the near future. We're trying to facilitate the process of investing in this sector. I guess you know that on Monday this week, EBRD signed a memorandum of understanding with Bulgaria, which provides the opportunity to EBRD to support Bulgaria with respect to utilization of structural funds, and also its recovery and resilience plan, which is hotly debated at the moment. And this memorandum provides the foundation, the launchpad for us to provide technical assistance and policy advice on all those European instruments. And we're now discussing the scale and the coverage of this support. So this is briefly what we do in this area. Before I hand over to the next panelist, could you mention a few of these European mechanisms or programs which are used for the funding of this sector, where you take part as well? In some countries, we provide support through the Modernization Fund. As far as I know, Bulgaria is still in the pipeline, this fund, but this is one of the instruments whereby industries can be supported. Also, fair transition funds as well. It is being finalized in Bulgaria. In the coal production areas, this is where you support green energy projects to ease the transition, and the recovery plan it has a focus on energy production, and directions some have been laid out where Bulgaria wishes to develop vis-a-vis this fund. Mr. Asen Yagodin, he's a CEO responsible for corporate banking and financial markets in Postbank, and you have a long history in funding renewables. I remember back in 2014 with the EBRD, you got a reward as a bank which has taken up the highest amount of funds, and you have also sponsored the renewables and energy efficiency funds throughout the years. What are the programs where you work at the moment? What's the bank's direction? What's your focus? Postbank, as you might know, is a leading bank in Bulgaria, not only in corporate banking, but representing corporate banking, I should say that our focus on renewables and stimulating this kind of economy, green economy, started way back in 2007. And we were active in during the first wave of photovoltaics and wind farms. And currently we have a portfolio of more than 60 million euro of lending loans. In this sector, we are now working on a new package of 65, 70 million euro. And this shows our belief in the promise of renewables. And on the other hand, we also stimulate investments in all measures of business towards energy efficiency to reduce energy cost. In the context of the last 6 to 18 months, this suggests that we have to increase our efforts. The banks cannot be on their own in this effort, and I guess we will be discussing the issues related to renewables. As far as programs are concerned, our bank has hardly missed any of them. All the schemes which contributed to facilitate or warrant the guarantee such policies, such measures, we have taken part in all of them. I won't list them down. Everybody who has an interest in borrowing to take part, to do a project in this area, they can address our business center. You know, we have branched out quite vigorously, so we have offices everywhere. It's easy to, our officers are available everywhere, but yes, Postbank firmly stands behind the green transition, and we're getting out of our way to facilitate it.
Really, your bank is one of the leaders in the financing of such projects. What kind of technology? Do you have some focus on specific technologies which you prefer, and you can, or you can finance all kinds of technologies? And according to your experience, what are the main technologies applicable in Bulgaria? and as it comes to your customers. I cannot say that we have a specific focus on a specific type of production of energy from renewable sources. Here, mainly we are led by the specificity of such sources in Bulgaria. We are not Denmark or Germany, so we don't have enough sources of water generated, wind generated electricity. So we have limited capacity when it comes to this. But on the other side, we are a little bit ahead, of course, not as much as the south part of Europe, but we are better positioned to photovoltaics. So if I use your words, our focus is mainly on photovoltaics. This technology, the positive features of this technology are in optimization of this technology, the panels, solar panels and inverters, and their diminishing of their price, cutting of their price. It's significant for the last 6 months, but it is related to some other problems, not about the effectivity which was achieved with the means for production of such energy. In the last 6 months, we have intensive demand or interest of financing of such projects from the bank. Of course, we have to overcome a lot of restrictions as it comes to administrative and some other restrictions. But every new project, we are looking at it, we are developing it, and we provide our recommendations for its development to the investor. And also we said we are claiming our expectations about the pricing. And when the investor is ready, because as you know, to buy a purchase of land which has capacity for renewable solar sources of energy, takes time. But our recommendations are set to the investor. Some other banks are quite skeptical when it comes to financing of such projects. But in Postbank, we are not going to stop, and we don't see the reason to stop. Of course, there are some risks, but we think that these are promising projects and promising for the future. So especially when it comes to the future improvement of technologies for conserving of energy, and to a certain extent, it's actually related to the future of our whole energy system. I'll come later to again to ask you about the recommendations you provide to your customers, but we'll speak about it later. Also, I expect some questions from the audience here, please. So I would like to present our third panelist here, Mr. Konstantin Kirov from Procredit Bank, who is leading the Department of Environment Protection and Green Projects. We understood that 30% of the bank portfolio was investments in the field of renewable energy sources. So in this context, what are your policy? What is the policy and the directions of your bank to this bank niche, and what are the opportunities that you see? I'm very happy that we reached to this panel, which is related to the bank investments. Yesterday, we discussed the feasibility of these projects. And 30% of our portfolio, as you mentioned, is for the green projects. Not only renewable sources, but also energy efficient buildings, energy efficient agriculture. How we achieve this? Several weeks ago, we celebrated 10 years of establishing such department in our bank. Actually, this is half of the time for which the bank exists in Bulgaria, on Bulgarian market. We are dealing mostly with the small and medium-sized enterprises in Bulgaria, which are most oftenly met in Bulgaria. Correspondingly, in the last 3 years, before we saw this trend for increasing the prices of the energy, we started a project how to communicate with our customers, what is the benefit of renewable solar systems, and what is the return of such investments. So the return is under 7 years, we discussed. So up to the present moment, with the present prices of the electricity, this return term is 2 years, but it's not good to use such high prices. So our focus on smaller businesses, smaller enterprises, because their investments in the photovoltaics has the most value added. Also, they have to pay additional taxes, but if it's concentrated on a self-use of this electricity, all these external expenses are eliminated. But in the near future, we're discussing subsidizing of larger projects for the medium-sized enterprise, where the enterprise owns land, but they don't want to invest their own funds. So that will provide us with the opportunity to use available land spaces in Bulgaria, and also to improve the prices here of electricity in Bulgaria as well. It's well known that we also develop electric vehicles charging stations network in Bulgaria. How do you see this as a development? Is it successful, this approach? This is a topic which is very close to photovoltaics and the energy sector. Over 5 years, we have a specialized credit for electric vehicles, which provides very good conditions for the end user. But the most often seen complaint is that the network is not well developed. Actually, that is not applicable so much for the moment. We have a relatively well-developed network. We created and installed more than 65 charging stations, which are openly accessible. Every customer can charge its own vehicle, which is our desire, which is very common with the photovoltaics. It's to demonstrate how larger institutions like us, we can develop such network and then provide it openly to the society. As you may see, the panel is quite diversified. We see some institutional players who had different type of focuses, different as it comes to the added value. They deal with a different product. So I would like to provide the opportunity to the audience to ask questions. I have my own questions, but I would like to address you and to hear your questions, because as you know, banks are extremely important institutions for development of our sector. But I would like only to ask you to use the microphone to say who you are, and just to be short as possible, of course.
If the question is directed to some of the participants, please tell us who he is. Question to all panelists. I'm a colleague of Mr. Velev, who yesterday spoke about origin warranties. When customers come up to you, the warranties of origin, are they included? That could enhance the return of the projects, or the knowledge of market has not reached such a degree. Is the question clear? I can share our experience. The warranties are not so valuable in the return we can expect from a project. This is expected to change, indeed. We see this instrument has grown. We have a task force in our structure. Apart from the green department I mentioned, we have 20% of our credit risk team has undergone training about how to consider funding of a green installation. There's a model, if it's a matter of electricity sales, and this component is included. We have inflation indexation as well, so it's not a fixed value at the end of the end, and then at the other end 15 years away, but we correct our expected revenues from that. I couldn't say anything else. Yes, we have this kind of models. We have experience, quite an experience, including with projects which for one reason or another have seen some issues. But the other components in the formation of financial flows, the other components are much more variable, much more uncertain than warranties. And I'd like to see our discussion going this way, because there are peak prices, purchase prices, which many market players take for granted, which will perpetuate itself, but they fail to take into account that eventual market saturation of energy suppliers, especially if concentrated in certain hours. This will influence the market, no doubt, and the bombastic values of late are very unsustainable. So the key components in the money flows lie elsewhere. This is where we should focus, and this is one of the reasons why I believe that the purely project funding without any guarantees from the sponsor to the sponsor is quite tough. What I can say, the fact that people have been oblivious to this segment, but it is also a fact that 2 years ago, we had a customer who managed to strike a deal with with the origin warranties he had with another EU member state, in another EU member state. And in this other country, the market was slow. But as far as the regulator could recognize this kind of instrument, which did take place, and he made a deal. And they bought this kind of guarantees from Bulgaria, and they applied them in another European country. So there's a potential there. It's a matter of type of regulation and desire of parties to interest among the parties to this kind of instrument. Christian Dimitrov from Greenpeace. I would like to ask the reps of Procredit and Postbank, the so-called energy cooperatives, are they in your focus? Although Bulgarian law has has yet to implement the renewables directive, but is it in your focus? Are you deliberating strategies to fund this kind of communities, which there's a variety of ways to articulate them? Up until now, we have had no such request for energy cooperatives. Talking about cooperatives, these are condominiums, these are consortia of companies, and they will stand with their money flows, with their balances, and they will stand behind the project and return on the project repayment of their debt. But yes, if there is such a project, if such a project pops up, yes, we would look at it, but it's a new development that has yet to happen. Talking about mechanisms, this is a fascinating mechanism that could facilitate the advent of such installations. Yes, the directive has not been commented, but various associations, various groups who would like this to take place, they have declared an interest. But yesterday, we didn't talk about when the directive could be transposed. There could be, within half a year, there could be some movements on this. Procredit Bulgaria works in Greece as well, and in the break you can see a video. We're showing a video about such energy communities that we have filmed in Greece. There are more than 200 households in this project I'm talking about. This is a strong instrument whereby people, even working as whatever, these are not big businesses that can afford a big project, but these people get united and with something which is close to a standard deposit in a bank, they participate in a project which can materialize in areas which haven't even been purchased, on the roof of a plant, something else where they can use some area where they have some contracts, rent contracts, they can lease some land. So this was mostly with purchased land, but these people were farmers. This is a region where a coal-fired station was closed. In Bulgaria, I see quite a potential for this kind of development. Energy communities where we as banks can support some of the investment, and we can have some current revenues. This is a problem for us, given the volatility of prices and the impossibility to fix prices long term. But this is under the big hat of the so-called crowdfunding solutions. I will not be talking extensively about them, but you can look them up. We've seen those things across Europe. In Germany, for instance, some older communities have more than 40 years of history.
Thank you. I have two more questions. One of them is actually continuation from the previous one. Is it possible with a certain supplement of the law for LSIT, we can solve this dilemma to attract funds and sources, including societies and just ordinary citizens, to include them in such societies like cooperative energy societies, energy cooperatives, to provide funding. Have you heard, have you thought about this? And the second question is a quick continuation from the discussion, yesterday discussion, about the price volatility and the higher price of the energy prices at the moment. And in the light of the large portfolios, isn't it going to be on the side of the banks to conclude the short-term agreements on a higher price, but to leave a longer market queue, or to prefer the long-term funding and agreement, which is some, to a certain extent, some risky, which is going to be better, longer contract with the lower prices, or a shorter contract with the higher prices for several years? I could answer for both of the questions. And it comes to assets, it's interesting topic. For the first time, I heard here about idea directed in this. Why not? If this form of funding is through obligation emissions and also some normal crediting, if we can form it as an acceptable form from the bank, it's a weight up risk. The banks will not lose the opportunity to use a competitive approach for normal credits compared to assets. As it comes to the second question, I don't think banks will put their customers, including investors in the photovoltaic fields, because they are 99% of the those who search credits. We are not putting them in discussion. We are putting them in dilemma. It is possible both. We can use a short-term or long-term system. So we can also introduce some mixed forms in so-called bullets, up to 30% to the 7th year. But this doesn't solve our dilemma with the predictability of the purchase price of the energy. As you know, the contracts are for just 1 year. Everything else is should be renegotiated, subject of inflation indexes. So whatever we speak at the moment in Bulgaria, we don't have a horizon for a long-term purchase of energy. Our customers to have a contract for a long period of time. Because that, of course, from the bank viewpoint, will be much better because it brings some predictability and controlled risk. Also, for the customer, it will secure the customer for a short drop. I mean, short-term drop in the price, or we are talking about the gigawatts of energy. If we realize it, of course, it's a hypothesis which is not supported by the current realities, because our energy grid is distributed in such areas which are not suitable for solar energy. So somebody has to invest in new grid, new electricity distribution grid. So, and of course, this is, of course, it will make the new projects more expensive and it increases the risk. I could start from the second question to continue the Mr. Yagodin. Of course, as it comes to the structuring of the project for project financing, we are quite flexible. We can establish financial structure which will work and will be adapted to the customer requirements, which doesn't mean that we can accept all kinds of structures, any structure. We have certain expectations related, said in common, just how to improve the return and to distribute the risks between the investor and the financing institution. Of course, the key question is how long is going to be this contract for purchase of energy. We have projects which are financed on a merchant base. First project was in 2019 in Poland, but we have to clarify to realize such project, we have to have a well-developed market as it in Poland, and also a good, well-established portfolio of the investor, and also the terms to be conservative enough to be acceptable for the bank. And the difference between the conjuncture from 2019 up to now is significant. We can work in the direction of the long-term purchase contract, which will provide us with some predictability. Also, we can work also in the direction of short-term contracts, which will partially cover the generated energy. But of course, in structuring of such a financial model and so-called decising, we are discussing the different money flows. We divide them into guaranteed and non-government, guaranteed, not guaranteed. And then we'll discuss revaluation of the debt. And the guaranteed money flows will be beneficiary for the customer. We can apply more beneficial terms. We also can provide short-term contracts, which will provide the investor after expiration of initial period of 3 to 4 years. They can be renewed in better, and we can structure some sort of incentives like a cash sweeps or some other way, so the investor to be interested, to have incentive to renew the purchase contract if it's difficult to conclude at the beginning a long-term contract. So we are quite flexible, but it's important to understand that we have to share the risk, because in some cases we have cases where the investors receive some market signals related to the highest prices at the moment with the current conjuncture, current status quo, and they don't want to restrict them with the long-term contracts. They will try to minimize their own part, so the bank considers this direction quite risky and not acceptable. I would like just to make addition for those two questions. When we have a law act for energy societies, this law will be beneficiary for such societies. It will provide them a priority for the purchase of the electricity. It's in this society there will be more sites, of course, and we'll try to cover all the sites in such a project. As it comes to the second question, at the moment we can provide the customers with a long-term contract, but the question of the main question is, where is the higher risk, in which part, to the bank or to the customer or to the investor? Because such a risk, the question is where the risk goes. One of the options is to have a co-debtor who can provide money flow, which will provide us with stability to agree with such projects and then to watch the market and to finance prices for the long term. The other option is to request a higher participation to shorten the terms or to increase the return, to eliminate some alternatives, for instance, just to guarantee the income from such projects.
On your first question, yes, it is possible, but the transposition of 994 directive and renewables 2018-2019, it is possible, but societies should have a framework in order to have access to markets, opportunity to interact with other market players. For banks, it might be possible as sufficient guarantee, but for the life of these societies, so to speak, yes, some certain amendments to the law needs to be made, the Renewables Energy Act, etc. As far as contracts are concerned, we heard that there are 10-year PPAs already made, and the exposition and the return horizon is 5 or 6 years, even shorter. So 10 years is quite a robust horizon, and banks will be happy given such a horizon, depending on how you distribute your risk. Any other questions? Name is Anton Zhelev from Bulgarian Solar Association. This question is somewhat uncomfortable for banks. Funding of small roof stations. There is a market niche which can be blasted very soon. This is the so-called floor property. That's the association of owners. This is a great market niche of those tenement blocks that want to have photovoltaics installed on the roofs. So I'd like to ask you, have you ever deliberated this? What can be done? What kind of tool can we use to fund this so-called in Bulgaria floor property? That's tenement blocks where people have different shares. This a large interest is looming towards these small sites. What can we do? What can we change in our laws or the Floor Property Act or the Renewables Act so that banks find security in their return in order to be willing to fund this kind of projects? Thank you. I can say a few words. There are issues in terms of legal provisions. For instance, the Energy Production Act has given a very broad definition of a site, production site, and every transformation of energy should be production. If we have a firewood stove, the transformation of coal or wood into fire, into energy, makes us producers. So licensing goes with over 5 megawatts. But yeah, the definition is uncertain. If a legal entity or an individual is to be a producer, they need to have certain rights under different laws, the energy law, the territory structuring acts, the so-called permit to get permitting, also the Environment Protection Acts. He needs to be a contracting authority. There are two forms, only two forms in Bulgaria, where you can have certain material rights over certain land, or you need to have an established construction right, development right. And the issue with roofs, whether you can be given permission to build on the roof, or you can sell your roof alone without the building. It's quite an entangled legal issue. 10 days ago, we had an event. It turned out that there are banks who have already funded this kind of projects. So it was, and the notaries have established mortgages on roofs. That's quite a weird, that was a surprise to me. But yes, the trend is in place. There is a little experience. Whether banks are going to go for it, and if the borrower defaults, how the banks, what the banks can do, having this kind of mortgage on their hands. But these issues will have to be addressed in the context of the Repower initiative and the directions of the European Commission to member states to shorten the process of permission for this kind of facade or roof constructions and the areas around residential areas. Yes, a solution needs to be found. Sorry, the solution has already been found. Our tenement block, it has a photovoltaic on and 6 category, and the Floor Property Act, there's a provision how you create this. So there is a path. It has been well trodden already, but it's a matter of funding. We were lucky because we could fund it on our own without borrowing. But people want to know, because you cannot collect money from everybody in a block. If there is a decision, if there is it is less than 100% of agreement. It's enough for most of owners of the common parts to agree. So my question only focuses on the funding, but the permission to build is already secure. yeah, the banks feel insecure because if they default, you don't know what kind of execution you're going to go for. If there is a solution of the properties, I'm not a lawyer myself, but I'll try to step into the shoes of a lawyer. Yes, they could see the floor property, including the roof, as a common right and an entitlement of all the owners. And you need a majority to deal with this site. And this is how you secure the mortgaging. You have a permit to build, and you'll find a form to establish a mortgage. So you have security, legally established security, and there is an installation on the roof, and then we come to the very production of energy and the revenues from this energy. If revenues are not enough to service your debt, who is the one to fill the gap? Is there a commitment on behalf of all the owners, of the floor owners? And where should the bank go if there's insufficient repayment and if there's a shortage from the sales of your energy? These are questions that need an answer. And the simplest solution is that all the members of the block, they should sign the contract as physical entities, so the bank could fix on their own responsibility, personal responsibility. But you need an agreement from them. Everybody individually needs to agree. How about if you have guarantees from a municipality? If the state, the government is a guarantor, this is a no-risk instrument. This is up to 30 kilowatts, and they still have a feed-in tariff. There is less interest to less than 30 kilowatts because the price is less than the preferential at the moment, but ours is 30 kilowatts, and we have a contract, feed-in tariff contract, a long-term purchase contract. We are talking, there are thousands of tenement blocks in this country where you can install it, and people are only seeking for funding options. I know that the bank needs to find security and return on its investment. So my question is there, are you thinking about tools? I mean, what needs to be done? These roof installations are a part of the Green Deal, a part of energy efficiency, and therefore they can be they can be subsidized just as the insulation, the thermal insulation was subsidized by the government. There could be certain resources, certain earmarks by the government to promote those. If the banks should be interested in that, the process should be enough smooth in order for the banks to show interest in it. And if you have, in order to get your payments and to collect your debt, that's a very heavy logistics. If you seek signatures from everybody individually, and that will appreciate the process to such a degree that the banks will lose interest. So municipalities, I don't think they would be interested in this kind of thing, but the government, similar to this heat installation program, along these lines, they could help, the government could help. If it's a small installation, it isn't so scary because it is enough for one or two people who have better income from the building. We are talking about small relatively small loans. So if the property manager and a couple of other people who believe in this kind of thing and in the revenues it's going to bring, they're going to partially take on the risk and are able to cover it if there is any lower income. But what you hear from the market is that they failed to get the permit. Your example is encouraging, but we have to discuss how this was achieved, hopefully within some reasonable terms and deadlines. 2 years from 2011 until 2013, until we joined the grid. But this is a deadline. 2 years is a term which few people can endure. We can build a case. What you have done, it can turn into a good practice, into a model. If you use warranty for the security to rely on special line instead of a mortgage, this would cover the security, and it's a small amount to lend. So I think there is promise in it. There's another aspect as well. It is crucial to take into account the performance of the station, of the generator and its management. So you need the new directives provisions transposed. It is important how you sell your energy, how you maintain this facility on top of your block. You need some certain amount of technology and knowledge and expertise, and the sale itself. I'm far from thinking that every property manager will be a salesman of energy to keep track of performance and economic indicators. It needs to be contracted out to a third party to be dealt with, because it matters for the bank. If you see that there is a failure to deliver, if you fail to maintain this facility in a proper way, this will affect the behavior of banks, and the laws are murky or missing in this respect. In practical terms, we're talking about practical aspect, not only take the money and run. Yes, we have a photovoltaic, but it's a mirror into the sky and doesn't work. I'm not against. I'm also interested for my own residential block, but there's quite a few issues to get out of the way. Anybody? Because we are according to schedule. If you have anything else to say, some last messages. What needs to change in the regulations in order to provide a longer horizon?
This is not a problem for financing, because we are funding the projects which are already agreed, and it's possible to start their implementation. But the part of our party is preliminary to become owner of the land, to get all the permissions, authorizations from the different institutions, and then it's the moment for implementation, final implementation of the project, when the bank takes part. So the bank actually works in the environment of the uncertainty of the purchase price. Of course, there are many cases for more than 1 year, but in the most case, we are depending on energy traders that can take the responsibility for the certain purchase price for only 1 year, which creates certain uncertainty for the banks, which can be guaranteed with a larger shareholding share from the sides. But the main problem is in the agreement of the new project. It's a very difficult process to get the point for acceptance point for the entering into the grid, also to get the necessary permissions, because sometimes the to establish a new electricity transfer grid on a certain distance, which is quite expensive, and such projects is not feasible enough. So the first issue is to make this procedure much shorter, not to take years but months. Second, to get the government guarantees for the grid, that it's acceptable for the newly installed power installations to be included in the connected with the grid. Now, up to the certain category, our lands are protected, but there are some not lands which have no any agricultural meaning, and agricultural value can be used for a new power installations. But also we expect the government to invest certain funds for improvement of this infrastructure, and all this should be done simultaneously in the same time scale. And this will provide the system the opportunity in several years to establish a system for conservation of electrical energy. We're discussing, the government discuss for such batteries or certain facilities for conservation of electricity energy, but these are only talks. We haven't seen any real intentions in this field. Investors are looking in this direction. Investors understand the importance of conservation of energy. May I have one additional questions for supplementing of this topic for cooperative supply of green energy and the investment sources, funding of this project? Do you have some offers for to invest in production of components used for such projects, like inverters, production inverters, batteries, etc.? I don't want to be specific when it comes to such components, but just do you have such intentions or offerings from customers? We have some offer, which is we don't have such an offer at all. We don't have something like a real project with a reasoning how we are going to fulfill it, how you're going to implement it. We don't have such a complete project with all the analysis for the return, what technology is going to be used, where it's going to be know-how could be taken, etc. Nothing specific and nothing concrete we don't have. We just have a lot of pictures and just common talks. I cannot add anything more. At the present, we don't have active projects which are real and we can fulfill in these directions. One thing which should be mentioned, that one of the topics of the plan for recovery and sustainability is to create a system for conservation of electricity, of electrical energy, conservation of electrical energy. But I don't think that the specificity of this project is enough to even to discuss it properly. I haven't seen any business plans for such projects that can be fulfilled or completed. I could say that in the last 6 months or even more, I see some negative trend, which is a risk for us as well. Who is building the electrical installations? The panels are the same, but there are not such no such companies in our market who have a reasonable experience in building of such installations, which is valid for the smaller projects. And this is a focus on which we have to stress. As it comes to the larger projects, it's not well pronounced, this issue, because they are fulfilled or completed from experts who are also taking part in some larger projects in abroad. But as it comes to the small projects, which will this is an issue which will create a negative response in the society. With this, I believe we fulfill the goals of our discussion. Even there are more, of course, interesting questions, but the time is pressing us. So I'd like to express gratitude to our panelists. You see that in the whole chain, to the small and the medium businesses and small and medium projects and the large projects, banks are here and they can be used, and their opportunities can be used. Thank you very much.